What would cause someone to meticulously clean a crime scene with bleach before slipping away into the afternoon sun? Could a killer be so calculated that they chose their outfit and even their walk to vanish in plain sight? Welcome. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of the Scott Ratigan case. I will be focusing on the main mental health and psychological indicators while providing the backstory. I don't just talk about the crimes, I talk about the psychology behind the crimes and the mysteries that captivate us. I look beyond the facts of the case to understand the why of the crime. My analysis is based on my speculations. It's not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. The lack of a forced entry in the 800 block of North Randolph Street suggests a deeply unsettling psychological possibility. If there was no struggle at the door, did Scott Ratigan know his killer? Or was he targeted by someone with a predatory level of patience? On January 17, 2020, the Ballston neighborhood of Arlington, Virginia, a young man's life ended in a high-rise apartment. Scott was 24 years old and shared the 20th floor apartment with his sister. He was a Radford University graduate working for a local restoration company. His family describes him as a person of pure joy and exceptional friendship. At approximately 5:30 p.m., a relative entered the apartment after not hearing from Scott for some time. They found him in his bedroom suffering from severe trauma to his upper body. Medics arrived quickly, but could only pronounce him deceased at the scene. The first psychological red flag is the presence of organized cleaning behavior at the scene. First responders and the relative who found him noted a powerful, overwhelming smell of bleach. From a mental health perspective, the act of cleaning a crime scene suggests a high level of cognitive functioning and emotional regulation under extreme stress. This is not the behavior of someone who acted in a sudden, impulsive heat of passion. Bleaching a scene is a cold, calculated attempt to erase an identity and a legacy. It reveals a perpetrator who likely has a forensic awareness or perhaps a history of compulsive control, or maybe he even watched a lot of true crime cases. Was the person's need for order so great that even after committing a violent act, they could not leave without tidying the evidence? A messy or disorganized killer usually flees in a panic, leaving behind a trail of chaos. The organized killer, however, remains in the space with the victim to methodically scrub away their presence. This behavior hints at a psychological profile of someone who may be highly perfectionistic or even narcissistic. They view the crime scene not as a tragedy, but as a puzzle that needs to be solved to ensure their own survival. How does a human being stand in a room with a deceased person and clean the scene with bleach? Police eventually released surveillance footage from that afternoon that added another layer to this psychological mystery. The footage shows a person of interest walking near the apartment building around the time of the murder. This individual was dressed entirely in black, wearing a black jacket, black pants, and a black backpack. They also wore a face mask, which was highly unusual for January 2020, just weeks before the global pandemic changed our norms. Everybody wore masks then, but this person wore it before the pandemic. The person of interest had a very specific physical trait, a pigeon-toed gait, where the feet turn significantly inward. Does a distinctive physical trait like a pigeon-toed walk create a psychological burden that leads to social isolation or resentment? Some investigators and online sleuths have wondered if this gait was faked to throw off the investigation. If the gait was a performance, it indicates a level of deceptive planning that is terrifyingly sophisticated. It would mean the perpetrator didn't just hide their face, they hid their very manner of movement. This level of commitment to a persona suggests a person who is comfortable with long-term deception. In clinical psychology, we look at the mask of sanity, where a person can blend into society while harboring violent impulses. The perpetrator was able to walk through a busy Arlington neighborhood in broad daylight without drawing immediate suspicion. This suggests that they may have a high degree of social camouflage, the ability to mimic normal behavior to hide their true intent. The timing of the crime is another significant behavioral indicator. Scott's sister had left the apartment for only about an hour to pick up friends from the airport. The killer seemingly knew exactly when the apartment would be empty and when Scott would be alone. This points toward a predatory stalking or a perpetrator who was already a part of Scott's social or professional circle. If the killer was an acquaintance, the portrayal adds a layer of psychological complexity regarding the motive. Was there a hidden resentment or perceived slight that Scott was entirely unaware of? In many cases of targeted violence, the offender has spent weeks or months nursing a grievance. This mental health indicator involves obsessing over a person or a situation until it becomes a fixation. The killer doesn't just want the victim gone. They want to exert ultimate power over them. By entering Scott's private sanctuary, his bedroom, the killer violated the most intimate boundary possible. This suggests the motive was personal, even if the reason remains a mystery to everyone else. The Arlington County Police and Scott's family have searched for any sign of conflict in his past. They looked through his elementary school records, his college years, and his professional life, but they found nothing. No enemies, no gambling debts, no secret lives. This victimology is what makes the case so psychologically complex. Scott was, by all accounts, a low-risk victim, meaning he did not engage in behaviors that typically lead to violent encounters. When a low-risk victim is targeted with such precision, it often speaks to the predator's pathology rather than the victim's actions. It suggests the killer may have projected their own failures or insecurities onto Scott. Sometimes a perpetrator is driven by envy-based aggression, where they target someone who represents everything they are not. Scott was loved, successful, and happy. For someone struggling with deep-seated inadequacy, that light can be a trigger. The use of bleach also tells us about the killer's psychological state regarding the mess of the crime. Bleach is an aggressive agent. It's used to destroy biological material, but it also has a symbolic meaning of purification. Does the use of the bleach suggest a psychological need to wash away the sin or guilt of the act? Or is it simply a cold tool used by a person who views human life as a biological stain to be removed? The person of interest was seen carrying a black backpack, likely containing the tools for the crime and the cleaning. This means they arrived at the high-rise prepared for a specific outcome. The psychological difference between an opportunistic killer and a prepared killer is vast. A prepared killer has likely rehearsed the event in their mind many times before the first step was ever taken. This is known as a violent ideation, a significant red flag where a person fantasizes about harm until it becomes a necessity. The fact that this case remains unsolved years later adds to the psychological trauma of the community and the family. The Ratigan family has offered a $50,000 reward for information. They speak of a backpack of grief that never goes away, but only becomes easier to carry. For the perpetrator, the psychological experience is likely very different. If they are still in the area, they are living a dual life, perhaps even following the news updates on the case. Some offenders find a sense of power in remaining uncaught, a phenomenon known as duping delight. They may feel a rush of superiority every time the police renew their requests for tips. This narcissism allows them to distance themselves from the reality of what they did in Scott's bedroom. The pigeon-toed gait remains the most significant physical clue, yet it is also a psychological barrier. If it was a disguise, the killer is someone who understands how to manipulate human perception. If it was real, the killer is someone who has lived their whole life with a visible identifying mark. How does a person with such a recognizable walk disappear in a city of thousands? It requires a high degree of situational awareness and a quiet, unassuming life. They are likely someone who goes unnoticed, the quiet one, who everyone assumes is harmless. Averageness is often the best hiding place for someone with a dark psychological interior. The trauma to the upper body mentioned in the autopsy report suggests a close-quarter, violent struggle. The type of violence is an exhausting and emotionally taxing for most people, yet the killer had the presence of mind to stay behind and clean. This suggests a flat affect or an emotional blunting often associated with certain personality disorders. They don't feel the horror that a normal person would feel in that moment. Instead, they feel the urgency of the task at hand, the cleaning, and the escape. As we look at the evidence, we see a person who is both meticulous and brazen. They entered a secure apartment building, committed a homicide, cleaned the scene, and walked out. All of this was done in the middle of a Friday afternoon in a busy urban center. The psychological profile is one of an extreme confidence, or perhaps a belief in their own invincibility. This person likely feels that they are smarter than the authorities and the public combined. They may have used the 20th floor location to their advantage, knowing the exit routes and the camera blind spots. The lack of forensic evidence left behind thanks to the bleach is a testament to their focus. We have to ask, what was the internal monologue of this individual as they rode the elevator or took the stairs? Was there any remorse, or was there only the cold satisfaction of a mission accomplished? The behavioral clues point to a perpetrator who was likely between 5'6" and 5'8", and was roughly 155 to 175 pounds in 2020. This person is now many years older, perhaps living among us, carrying the secret. Their mental health indicators suggest a person who can compartmentalize their life to an extreme degree. They can work a job, have a family, and sit at a dinner table while knowing that they took a life. This ability to compartmentalize is a hallmark of certain high-functioning antisocial traits. It allows them to avoid the crushing weight of guilt that would break a typical person. The Scott Ratigan case is a reminder that the most dangerous individuals are often the ones who plan for the silence that follows. The bleach, the mask, the gait, and the timing all weave a tapestry of a very specific kind of mind. A mind that values control above all else and views other people as obstacles to be managed. As the investigation continues, the focus remains on that person in the all black with the inward turned feet. The answer to why lies within the psychological landscape of someone who felt that they had the right to end the life and then clean up the mess. This is a traumatic case. It's a mystery case, one that was very well planned out. This individual had the backpack. They carried the bleach with them, I'm sure, and everything else that they used to clean the scene. And then they escaped. They didn't really even care about the cameras that would capture them. They wore all black, they wore a mask, and maybe even perhaps pretended their gait. We may never know. This is a mystery, but if you have any information about this case, please contact the authorities. So what did you think about this case? Were there any elements that stood out to you? If you want more mental health analysis of true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe for more. And if you found this case compelling, be sure to watch this next story. It will make you more aware of your surroundings. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.